Imagine discovering that the reason you have been failing to lose that stubborn belly fat has nothing to do with willpower, laziness, or not trying hard enough. Imagine finding out that the real reason your waistline refuses to shrink, despite all the diets you have followed, despite all the calories you have counted, despite all the sacrifices you have made, is that you have been fighting the wrong battle in the wrong way with the wrong weapons. Does that sound frustrating? Does it sound almost impossible to believe? I promise you, it is not only believable, but it is scientifically documented, and today you are going to understand exactly why, and more importantly, exactly what to do about it starting tomorrow morning. There is a dangerous misconception that has been spreading for decades through fitness magazines, diet apps, and well-meaning but uninformed advice from people all around you. And that misconception is killing your progress silently every single day. The misconception is this: to lose belly fat, you just need to eat less and move more. Cut the calories, run on the treadmill, and eventually the belly will shrink. Simple math, simple solution. But if you are reading this right now, there is a very good chance you have already tried that. You have already cut the calories. You have already sweated through cardio sessions. You have already white-knuckled your way through restrictive diets. And yet that visceral fat, that deep, dangerous belly fat wrapped around your organs is still there. Stubborn, immovable, and frankly infuriating. Here's what no one told you. Visceral fat is not like the fat on your thighs or your arms. It is not passive. It is not just stored energy waiting to be burned off with enough exercise. Visceral fat is a biologically active tissue. It behaves almost like a living organ inside your body. It produces hormones. It generates inflammatory signals. It communicates with your brain, your liver, your immune system. And it has developed a very sophisticated set of survival mechanisms that make it extraordinarily resistant to simple calorie cutting. When you try to fight visceral fat with nothing but a calorie deficit, it is like trying to put out a house fire with a garden hose. You might slow it down a little, but you are not addressing the real problem. Consider what visceral fat actually does inside your body when it is present in excess. It secretes adipokines, which are signaling molecules that promote systemic inflammation and impair insulin signaling throughout the body. It elevates circulating free fatty acids, which flood the liver and contribute to the development of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which in turn further worsens insulin resistance. It produces inflammatory cytokines, including TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, which are the same inflammatory messengers involved in serious chronic diseases. It physically compresses the organs around it, potentially impairing their function over time. And it creates a self-reinforcing feedback loop where the more visceral fat you have, the worse your insulin resistance becomes, and the worse your insulin resistance becomes, the easier it is to accumulate more visceral fat. This is not a simple problem. It is not a problem that yields to simple solutions. And yet, for decades, the medical and fitness mainstream has been offering simple solutions. Eat less, move more, count your calories, and be patient. For a meaningful percentage of people dealing with significant visceral fat, this advice produces frustrating, demoralizing, insufficient results. Not because those people are doing it wrong, but because the advice itself is incomplete. It addresses one variable, calorie balance, while ignoring the complex biochemical environment that determines how the body responds to that calorie balance. The real problem is biochemical. Visceral fat survives and thrives on specific biological signals: chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, impaired gut health, oxidative stress, disrupted liver metabolism. These are the true drivers of visceral fat storage and visceral fat stubbornness. And the shocking revelation that is going to change everything for you is this: there are specific foods that directly target and disrupt exactly these survival mechanisms. Foods that send biochemical signals so powerful and so precise that your visceral fat becomes metabolically destabilized. It stops behaving like a fortress and starts behaving like a storage depot that your body is finally willing to empty. I want to be completely transparent with you before we dive in. A calorie deficit is still the foundation. You cannot completely ignore energy balance. That is science, and it does not change. But the extraordinary truth is that two people eating the exact same number of calories, burning the exact same number of calories, can get dramatically different results depending on what types of foods they are eating, because the type of food you put in your body changes the hormonal environment. It changes the inflammatory landscape. It changes how your liver processes energy. It changes the signals your fat cells receive. And when those signals change, visceral fat that has been sitting completely unmoved for years suddenly begins to respond. This is not distant laboratory theory disconnected from your real life. This is biochemistry happening inside your body every single day at every single meal. And what you are about to discover, the 8 specific foods I am going to walk you through in detail, the science behind each one, the mechanisms they activate, the studies that confirm their power, and the practical ways to add them to your life starting immediately. This information has the potential to completely transform your relationship with your body, not through punishment, not through deprivation, not through suffering, but through something far more powerful: intelligence. The intelligence to give your body exactly the signals it needs to finally let go of that visceral fat it has been holding on to for so long. If you care about your health, your longevity, and finally seeing real results from the effort you are already putting in, then stay with me all the way through, because every single food we discuss builds on the last. And together they form a complete biochemical strategy that is far more powerful than any single food in isolation. Let us begin. The first food on this list is one that is extraordinarily easy to underestimate, because we have all been conditioned to think of it primarily as a snack. Something you grab mindlessly at a party or sprinkle on top of a salad without a second thought. I am talking about walnuts. And I need you to completely reframe everything you think you know about this humble food, because walnuts are not just a convenient snack. They are one of the most precisely targeted biological tools available to you for dismantling visceral fat from the inside out. Here is why this matters so deeply. Visceral fat does not grow and persist by accident. It grows because 2 specific conditions exist in your body simultaneously. The first condition is chronic inflammation. Visceral fat is extraordinarily sensitive to inflammatory signals. In fact, visceral fat does not just respond to inflammation passively. It actively produces inflammatory compounds itself, creating a vicious feedback loop. The more visceral fat you have, the more inflammation your body generates. The more inflammation your body generates, the more your body is biologically inclined to store and preserve visceral fat. It is a self-reinforcing cycle that a simple calorie restriction diet does almost nothing to interrupt. The second condition that allows visceral fat to thrive is insulin resistance. When your cells become resistant to insulin, your blood sugar stays elevated for longer periods after meals, and that elevated blood sugar sends direct signals to your body to store more fat, particularly in the visceral depot around your organs. Now, here's what makes walnuts remarkable. Walnuts attack both of these conditions at the same time with extraordinary precision. Walnuts are exceptionally rich in polyunsaturated fatty acids, and scientific studies have demonstrated that high intake of polyunsaturated fats sustained over 12 months produced measurable reductions in visceral fat as measured by MRI scanning, which is the gold standard for quantifying visceral fat, even without any deliberate emphasis on calorie restriction. Read that again, because it is genuinely stunning. The visceral fat reduction was independent of overall body weight loss. This means that people in these studies lost visceral fat specifically, even when the scale was not moving in dramatic ways. That is not what you get from simple calorie restriction, which tends to reduce fat somewhat indiscriminately. That targeted specific reduction of visceral fat is a biochemical effect caused by the unique fatty acid composition of walnuts. Walnuts are specifically abundant in omega-3 fatty acids, particularly alpha-linolenic acid. And alpha-linolenic acid has been shown in multiple studies to calm the inflammatory signals that originate from visceral fat tissue. Think of visceral fat as a biological fire. It stays lit by constantly generating inflammatory compounds that signal to your body that this fat depot needs to be preserved and protected. Alpha-linolenic acid works like a fire suppression system targeted directly at that inflammatory flame. When the inflammation drops, visceral fat becomes metabolically unstable. It loses its primary survival mechanism. and your body's natural fat-burning processes can finally access and dismantle it. But the effect on insulin sensitivity is equally important. Studies have shown that alpha-linolenic acid directly improves insulin sensitivity, which breaks the second pillar of visceral fat's survival strategy. When your cells respond properly to insulin again, blood sugar is cleared efficiently after meals, the signal to store visceral fat is dramatically reduced, and the hormonal environment in your body shifts decisively in favor of fat burning rather than fat storage. And then there is one more layer to the walnut story that most people completely miss. Walnuts increase the production of satiety hormones, including leptin and adiponectin. These are the hormones that tell your brain you are satisfied, that you have had enough, that you do not need to keep eating. When these hormones function properly, hunger becomes manageable without willpower, without white-knuckling your way through cravings, without the constant mental battle that makes dieting feel like torture. You simply feel satisfied earlier and for longer, which naturally reduces your overall intake without the psychological suffering that comes from forced restriction. The practical application is beautifully simple. A small handful of walnuts added to your daily routine, whether eaten on their own, mixed into oatmeal in the morning, scattered over a salad at lunch, or stirred into Greek yogurt as a snack, is enough to begin sending these powerful biochemical signals consistently. Consistency is the key word here, because the benefits of walnuts accumulate over time with regular exposure. This is not a food where one serving produces a dramatic result. It is a food where daily, consistent consumption over weeks and months progressively shifts your body's biochemical environment in a direction that makes visceral fat loss not just possible, but inevitable. Now, I want to ask you something directly. How many times have you walked past walnuts in the grocery store and given them absolutely no thought? How many times have you considered them optional, peripheral, just one of many nuts you could take or leave? After today, I hope that changes, because what you now know about walnuts is not common knowledge. Most people diligently cut calories and completely miss this kind of targeted biochemical leverage. You do not have to be most people. Comment below and tell me honestly, are walnuts already part of your daily routine, or is this a change you are going to make starting tomorrow? The second food on this list is going to shock you. And I say that not as an exaggeration, but as a genuine prediction based on how people typically react when they first encounter this information. Because the second food that science has shown can help reduce visceral fat is dark chocolate. Yes, you read that correctly. Dark chocolate. That food you have probably been telling yourself is a guilty pleasure, something to be rationed guiltily, consumed secretly, and followed by a promise to do better tomorrow. The truth is that under the right conditions, dark chocolate is not your enemy. It is a powerful metabolic ally. But the conditions matter enormously, so stay with me. The critical qualifier here is that we are talking about dark chocolate at a minimum of 85% cacao content, not milk chocolate, not the sweetened dessert bars that line most supermarket shelves, not the chocolate that hides behind a thin veneer of scientific legitimacy while being primarily sugar and dairy. We are talking about genuinely high cacao dark chocolate, the kind that is intense, slightly bitter, and nutritionally dense in ways that most people never fully appreciate. At 85% cacao and above, dark chocolate contains a remarkable nutritional profile. It is a meaningful source of fiber. It provides iron and magnesium, two minerals that play important roles in metabolic function. But the most important compounds for visceral fat reduction are the antioxidants, specifically a class of compounds called flavonols. Flavonols are powerful bioactive molecules that have been studied extensively for their effects on insulin sensitivity and oxidative stress, which, as we have already established, are two of the primary drivers of visceral fat accumulation and persistence. Let me walk you through the clinical evidence because it is genuinely compelling. There was a placebo-controlled trial conducted with endurance athletes that demonstrated a striking result. The group that received 5 grams of cocoa daily, delivering approximately 425 milligrams of flavonols over 10 weeks, experienced a significant and measurable reduction in visceral fat. Not only that, but the group also reduced their overall body fat percentage. This was not a marginal effect. This was a statistically significant, clinically documented outcome from a relatively small daily dose of high-quality dark chocolate. Then there was a separate 6-month trial published in the British Journal of Nutrition that enrolled postmenopausal women, a population that is particularly susceptible to visceral fat accumulation due to hormonal changes that accompany menopause. The study found that daily consumption of just 10 grams of 99% cacao chocolate reduced body fat mass and reduced body fat percentage over the course of the study. 10 grams, less than 2 squares of dark chocolate per day. That is not a dramatic intervention. That is a small, sustainable, genuinely enjoyable daily habit that produces measurable metabolic results over time. The mechanisms behind this are worth understanding because they help you appreciate why the cacao percentage matters so much. Flavonols activate molecular pathways that improve how your cells respond to insulin, which directly reduces the signal to store visceral fat. They also reduce oxidative stress throughout the body, which is important because visceral fat is both a generator of oxidative stress and a beneficiary of it. When you reduce systemic oxidative stress, you are disrupting one of the key environmental conditions that visceral fat needs to thrive. One important note of caution that responsible discussion of dark chocolate requires. Higher cacao content, dark chocolate can contain trace amounts of heavy metals, including cadmium and lead, which accumulate in cacao plants from the soil. This is not a reason to avoid dark chocolate entirely, but it is a reason to consume it in moderation rather than treating it as an unlimited free food. A daily portion of 10 to 20 grams of high-quality 85% or higher dark chocolate is a reasonable and evidence-supported approach. So let me ask you honestly, and I want you to comment your real answer below. How many times have you deprived yourself of dark chocolate in the name of being healthy, while simultaneously consuming foods with far less metabolic benefit? From today forward, you have permission to enjoy your dark chocolate intelligently, not recklessly, intelligently. Moving to the third food, we arrive at something that requires no shock value or surprising reframing because its reputation is already strong. But what most people do not fully understand is the specific mechanism by which it fights visceral fat and how targeted and precise that mechanism truly is. The third food is fatty fish, specifically varieties like salmon, sardines, mackerel, and tuna. These fish are among the most consistently supported foods in the scientific literature when it comes to visceral fat reduction, and the reason comes back once again to omega-3 fatty acids, specifically the forms called EPA and DHA. Unlike alpha-linolenic acid found in walnuts, which is a plant-based omega-3 that your body must convert into EPA and DHA, fatty fish deliver these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids directly and in highly bioavailable forms. EPA and DHA work directly inside fat tissue to reduce the inflammatory signals that allow visceral fat to persist. They improve insulin sensitivity through multiple pathways simultaneously. And they do something that is particularly important and that most people overlook entirely. They reduce fat accumulation in the liver. This matters enormously because your liver is not just a detoxification organ. Your liver is the metabolic gatekeeper for visceral fat. When fat accumulates in the liver, it disrupts the liver's ability to process glucose efficiently, which elevates blood sugar, which increases insulin secretion, which drives visceral fat storage. This cascade is one of the most underappreciated mechanisms behind stubborn belly fat. And fatty fish, through the action of EPA and DHA, directly interrupt this cascade by improving liver fat metabolism. When liver health improves, visceral fat almost always follows. The connection is that direct and that powerful. The practical implementation is genuinely manageable. 2 to 3 servings of fatty fish per week is sufficient to produce meaningful omega-3 effects. This does not require elaborate meal preparation. A can of sardines eaten as a snack, a grilled salmon fillet for dinner, a mackerel salad at lunch. These are not radical dietary interventions. They are simple, sustainable additions that deliver a concentrated dose of the exact molecules your body needs to fight visceral fat at the biochemical level. If you choose sardines, which are an excellent and economical option, look for brands that have been independently tested for mercury content, though sardines are small fish low on the food chain and are generally very low in mercury compared to larger species. For those who genuinely cannot eat fish due to allergies, dietary preferences, or limited access, algae-based omega-3 supplements are worth considering. Algae is the original source of EPA and DHA in the marine food chain. Fish contain these fatty acids because they eat algae or eat smaller fish that eat algae. Algae-derived omega-3 supplements bypass the fish entirely and deliver EPA and DHA directly, making them an effective alternative for those who cannot or choose not to eat fish. The bioavailability and metabolic effects are comparable to fish-derived omega-3s. However, for those who can eat fish, whole food sources are always preferable to supplements because they deliver the omega-3 fatty acids alongside other bioactive compounds including vitamin D, selenium, and high-quality protein, all of which contribute to the overall metabolic and anti-inflammatory effect. It is also worth understanding why the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids in your diet matters so profoundly for visceral fat. The modern Western diet is heavily skewed toward omega-6 fatty acids, primarily because of the widespread use of refined vegetable oils like sunflower, corn, and soybean oil. While omega-6 fatty acids are not inherently harmful, an excess relative to omega-3s actively promotes the inflammatory pathways that visceral fat exploits. Historically, humans evolved eating a diet with an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of roughly 2-to-1 or 4-to-1. In the modern Western diet, that ratio has shifted to somewhere between 15-to-1 and 25-to-1 in favor of omega-6. Regular consumption of fatty fish is one of the most powerful dietary interventions available for rebalancing this ratio and restoring a less inflammatory biochemical environment. I want you to comment below right now. How many servings of fatty fish are you currently eating per week? 1, 0, 3. There is no wrong answer here, only awareness. Because from the moment you know where you are starting from, you can make a conscious decision about where you want to go. The fourth food is one that most people have either never heard of or have seen in health food stores without understanding what makes it extraordinary. And I want to spend significant time here, because this food is one of the most misunderstood and underutilized tools for visceral fat reduction available. I am talking about broccoli sprouts, not regular broccoli, which is already a remarkably healthy vegetable, but the tiny, delicate sprouts that represent broccoli at the very beginning of its growth. And the difference between broccoli sprouts and mature broccoli is not marginal. It is not a small percentage difference. Broccoli sprouts contain between 20 and 100 times more of the key compound we are about to discuss than the same weight of mature broccoli. That is not a typo. 20 to 100 times more. Gram for gram, broccoli sprouts are among the most metabolically active foods on the planet. The compound responsible for this extraordinary potency is called sulforaphane. And sulforaphane is not just one more antioxidant to add to a long list of antioxidants that sound impressive, but deliver vague and diffuse benefits. Sulforaphane has a specific, documented, measurable effect on 3 of the exact biological processes that drive visceral fat accumulation simultaneously. The first process sulforaphane targets is inflammation. It does this by activating a protein called NRF2, which functions as your body's master regulator of the cellular defense response. Think of NRF2 as the control center for your entire internal anti-inflammatory and antioxidant network. When NRF2 is activated, it switches on a cascade of genes that protect your mitochondria, the energy-generating structures inside your cells, and that aggressively reduce systemic inflammation throughout the body. And as we have now established multiple times throughout this discussion, visceral fat is extraordinarily sensitive to the inflammatory environment. Visceral fat thrives when inflammation is high. It becomes metabolically active, generating more inflammatory compounds, defending itself against breakdown, and continuing to expand. But when sulforaphane activates NRF2 and inflammation drops, visceral fat becomes metabolically unstable. It stops functioning like a self-sustaining hormone factory. It becomes vulnerable. And a vulnerable visceral fat depot is one your body can finally begin to dismantle. The second process sulforaphane targets is insulin signaling. Through its activation of NRF2 and related pathways, sulforaphane improves cellular insulin sensitivity, helping your cells respond properly to insulin again and reducing the chronic elevated blood sugar that drives visceral fat storage. But the third process is perhaps the most important and the least widely known. Sulforaphane directly tells your liver to slow down glucose production when blood sugar is already elevated. This process, called gluconeogenesis, is the liver's tendency to generate new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, even when blood sugar is already high. Excess liver glucose output is one of the primary drivers of the chronic elevated blood sugar that leads to visceral fat storage. And sulforaphane, uniquely among common dietary compounds, can directly modulate this liver process. That is not something you get from most foods. That is a highly specific, highly targeted mechanism that makes broccoli sprouts functionally unlike almost anything else you can eat. Half a cup of fresh broccoli sprouts per day, eaten raw to preserve the sulforaphane precursors that are activated during chewing and digestion, is enough to deliver clinically meaningful doses of this compound. You can eat them in salads, add them to sandwiches, or blend them into a smoothie where their mild flavor is easily masked. The key is consistency, because sulforaphane has a short half-life in the body. It does not accumulate and linger. You need regular, repeated exposure to maintain the biochemical signals it generates in your liver and fat tissue. Daily consumption, even in small amounts, is more valuable than occasional large doses. Now be honest with me in the comments. Had you ever heard of broccoli sprouts before today? Had you ever understood why they are so dramatically different from regular broccoli? For most people, the answer is no, and that gap in knowledge is costing them real metabolic progress every single week. The fifth food continues the theme of targeting the specific biochemical environment that visceral fat depends on for its survival. Blueberries seem simple. They are beautiful, delicious, widely available, and universally considered healthy in a vague and general way. But the specific mechanism by which blueberries attack visceral fat is far more precise and far more powerful than their cheerful reputation suggests. The active compounds responsible are polyphenols, and specifically a subgroup of polyphenols called anthocyanins. These are the pigments that give blueberries their deep blue and purple color, and they are extraordinarily biologically active. Visceral fat is made up of cells that are metabolically active in ways that other fat cells are not. They respond quickly and dramatically to changes in fat-burning signals. And anthocyanins generate a concentrated burst of exactly those signals through multiple simultaneous mechanisms. Anthocyanins suppress the inflammatory pathways that visceral fat depends on for its metabolic protection. They promote the growth of beneficial gut bacteria, which, as we will discuss further when we get to chia seeds, has profound downstream effects on visceral fat through the gut inflammation axis. They increase the rate of fat breakdown at the cellular level. And they promote thermogenesis, the production of heat through the burning of calories, which effectively means your body is running its metabolic engine at a slightly higher rate when anthocyanin intake is consistent and meaningful. The research supports this directly. A cross-sectional analysis found that higher anthocyanin intake was associated with a 9% reduction in visceral fat tissue. 9% is not a trivial number. 9% of visceral fat represents a meaningful improvement in your metabolic health markers, your inflammatory baseline, your cardiovascular risk profile, and your insulin sensitivity. And that association was specifically with visceral fat, not just overall body fat, which again reinforces the idea that we are talking about targeted biochemical effects rather than generic calorie burning. The beauty of blueberries from a practical standpoint is that they require no preparation, no special techniques, and no acquired taste. They are inherently enjoyable. A cup of fresh or frozen blueberries as part of breakfast, blended into a smoothie, mixed with Greek yogurt, or simply eaten as a snack is all that is needed. Frozen blueberries retain their anthocyanin content very well, making them an economical and convenient option even when fresh berries are not in season. It is also worth noting that blueberries are not the only fruit with meaningful anthocyanin content, though they are among the richest sources. Blackberries, black currants, acai berries, cherries, and purple grapes all contain significant anthocyanin levels. If blueberries are unavailable or prohibitively expensive in your region, any of these deep-colored fruits can serve a similar biochemical function. The key is the color. Deep purples, blues, and reds in fruits and vegetables are nature's visual signal that anthocyanins and other polyphenols are present in significant amounts. The more deeply colored the fruit, the higher the polyphenol content tends to be. This is a simple, practical heuristic that can guide better food choices without requiring a deep understanding of nutritional biochemistry. There is also an interesting interaction between blueberries and exercise worth mentioning. Research has suggested that consuming anthocyanin-rich foods around periods of physical activity may amplify both the anti-inflammatory effects and the fat-burning effects. Exercise itself creates a temporary inflammatory response in muscle tissue, and anthocyanins help to resolve this inflammation more efficiently, which supports faster recovery and, importantly, reduces the systemic inflammatory burden that visceral fat exploits. If you exercise regularly, adding blueberries to your pre- or post-workout nutrition may provide compounding benefits beyond what either the blueberries or the exercise would produce independently. Food number 6 is one that has been present in kitchens across cultures for centuries, but has only recently begun to reveal the true depth of its metabolic power: chia seeds. Tiny, unassuming, seemingly inert little seeds that, when you understand what they do inside your digestive system and how those effects cascade outward to affect your visceral fat, become something genuinely exciting to add to your daily routine. The primary mechanism through which chia seeds fight visceral fat begins in the gut. Chia seeds are extraordinarily rich in soluble fiber, and soluble fiber, when it reaches your gut, becomes food for your gut bacteria, the diverse microbial community that lives in your digestive tract and that we are increasingly understanding to be one of the most important determinants of your overall metabolic health. When your gut bacteria ferment this soluble fiber from chia seeds, they produce short-chain fatty acids. The most important of these is butyrate, and butyrate has remarkable effects on your metabolic health. It improves insulin sensitivity directly. It reduces inflammation throughout the body. It strengthens the integrity of your gut lining, preventing the leaking of inflammatory compounds into your bloodstream. This last point is particularly important and deserves emphasis. When your gut lining is compromised, a condition sometimes described as increased intestinal permeability, bacterial fragments and other inflammatory molecules from your gut can pass through the gut wall and enter your bloodstream. Once in the bloodstream, these compounds trigger a systemic inflammatory response. And that chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation is, as we have established, exactly what visceral fat needs to survive and expand. By feeding beneficial gut bacteria with soluble fiber and promoting the production of butyrate, chia seeds are directly attacking one of the most underappreciated pathways through which visceral fat maintains itself. Think of your gut as the foundation of your metabolic house. When the foundation is cracked and leaking, everything built on top of it is compromised. Your hormonal balance, your inflammatory levels, your insulin response, your visceral fat. But when you repair the foundation, when you strengthen the gut lining and diversify the gut microbiome through consistent soluble fiber intake, the entire structure above it becomes more stable. Inflammation drops, insulin sensitivity improves, and visceral fat loses the biological environment it needs to thrive. A meta-analysis that compiled the results of 8 separate randomized controlled trials found that chia seed consumption significantly reduced waist circumference. The reduction ranged from 1.5 to nearly 3 centimeters across the studies. That is a clinically meaningful reduction in abdominal size that was documented consistently across multiple independent trials. As an additional benefit, chia seed consumption was also associated with reductions in blood pressure, which is another marker heavily influenced by visceral fat and chronic inflammation. Chia seeds are also remarkable for their effects on hunger and blood sugar stability. The soluble fiber they contain forms a gel-like substance in your digestive system that slows the rate at which food leaves your stomach and enters your small intestine. This slowing of digestion has 2 powerful effects. First, it dramatically blunts the blood sugar spike that would normally follow a carbohydrate-containing meal. Lower blood sugar spikes mean lower insulin responses, which means less visceral fat storage signaling. Second, it extends the feeling of fullness and satisfaction after a meal, reducing the likelihood of overeating or reaching for unnecessary snacks between meals. Adding chia seeds to your diet is genuinely simple. They can be stirred into overnight oats, blended into smoothies, mixed into yogurt, or soaked in liquid to create a chia pudding. The key practical note is to increase your chia seed intake gradually, starting with a small amount and building up over time to avoid the digestive discomfort that a sudden large intake of fiber can cause. And staying well hydrated is important because soluble fiber needs water to do its work properly. Comment below right now with total honesty. How is your gut health? Do you experience chronic bloating, irregular digestion, or persistent low-level discomfort? Because if you do, these are not just minor inconveniences. They may be the visible surface of a gut environment that is actively feeding your visceral fat through chronic inflammation. And chia seeds, along with the other foods in this list, are tools you can begin using today to change that. Comment below right now with total honesty. How is your gut health? Do you experience chronic bloating, irregular digestion, or persistent low-level discomfort after meals? Because if you do, these are not just minor inconveniences to be dismissed or masked with antacids and digestive aids. They may be the visible surface of a gut environment that is actively feeding your visceral fat through chronic inflammation. Every time your gut is inflamed and leaking, it is sending a wave of inflammatory signals into your bloodstream. And your visceral fat is receiving those signals and interpreting them as instructions to stay, to grow, to protect itself. Chia seeds, by consistently feeding the bacteria that produce butyrate and strengthen your gut lining, begin to reverse this process. Not overnight, not in a week, but over months of consistent intake, the difference in your gut environment and the downstream difference in your visceral fat can be profound. Now, I want to pause and ask you something that I think is worth reflecting on deeply. How much of your current dietary strategy is focused on removing things, restricting things, cutting things out? How much of your mental energy around food is directed toward deprivation and resistance? And how much of it is directed toward intelligently adding the specific foods that target the specific mechanisms driving your visceral fat? The reason I ask is that most people's relationship with fat loss is almost entirely oriented around subtraction. Take away the carbs, take away the fat, take away the calories. And while some degree of subtraction is necessary, the extraordinary power of addition, the power of strategically incorporating foods that send precisely targeted biochemical signals to your visceral fat, is something that most people have never fully explored. The foods we are discussing today represent a completely different kind of leverage. The seventh food is one that has been the subject of significant scientific attention in recent years and whose mechanisms for fighting visceral fat operate through pathways that are truly remarkable in their elegance. Extra virgin olive oil is a food that has been central to Mediterranean diets for thousands of years. And modern nutritional science is finally beginning to explain precisely why those populations have historically demonstrated such favorable metabolic profiles. A double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial published in the European Journal of Nutrition examined the effects of consuming 25 milliliters of olive oil daily as part of an energy-restricted diet over 9 weeks. The group consuming olive oil experienced approximately 80% greater fat loss compared to the control group consuming soybean oil. 80% greater fat loss from the same calorie deficit. That is the power of food quality over pure calorie arithmetic made visible in a controlled scientific setting. The mechanisms behind this extraordinary result center on olive oil's exceptional polyphenol content. The polyphenols in high-quality extra virgin olive oil activate two particularly important molecular pathways. The first is called AMPK, which functions as your body's cellular energy sensor. When AMPK is activated, it sends a clear signal to your body: burn fat rather than store it. It shifts your metabolic state in a fundamental direction toward fat utilization. Think of AMPK as a switch that exists inside every cell, And when it is flipped to the on position by olive oil polyphenols, it transforms those cells from fat-storing units into fat-burning machines. The second pathway activated by olive oil polyphenols is SIRT1, sometimes called the longevity pathway, which improves mitochondrial efficiency. Your mitochondria are the structures inside your cells that burn fuel to produce energy. When mitochondrial efficiency improves, your muscles and other tissues become better equipped to burn calories as energy rather than allowing them to be stored as fat. The combined effect of AMPK activation and improved mitochondrial efficiency creates a metabolic environment that is dramatically more favorable to fat burning and dramatically less favorable to fat storage, even when calorie intake is held constant. This is the most concrete illustration available of why the type of food matters independently of calorie count. Two people eating identical calorie deficits, but one using olive oil and one using vegetable oil, will get meaningfully different results because olive oil is changing the molecular environment inside the body in ways that a simple calorie equation cannot capture. This is also a direct refutation of the oversimplified view that all fats are equal, that a gram of olive oil is the same as a gram of vegetable oil because the calorie count is identical. The calorie count may be identical. The biochemical effects are not even remotely the same. The polyphenols in olive oil are biologically active. They are sending signals to your metabolism that vegetable oil cannot send. And those signals, over time, accumulate into real, measurable, visible differences in your body composition. There is also something worth saying about what olive oil replaces when you make it your primary cooking fat. Most people in modern households use refined vegetable oils for cooking. Sunflower oil, corn oil, soybean oil, these oils are highly processed, stripped of any meaningful antioxidant or polyphenol content, and have omega-6 to omega-3 ratios that actively promote the chronic inflammation that visceral fat thrives on. When you replace these oils with extra virgin olive oil, you are not just adding something beneficial, you are simultaneously removing something harmful. You are making a double positive move, one that removes a source of inflammation while adding a source of powerful metabolic signals. That is the kind of leverage that makes a real difference. And here is something that most people never think about. The quality of the olive oil you buy matters enormously. Not all extra virgin olive oil is created equal. Some products labeled as extra virgin olive oil have been adulterated with cheaper refined oils, stripping them of most of their polyphenol content. Buying from reputable producers, looking for harvest dates on the label, choosing oil stored in dark glass bottles, and tasting for the characteristic peppery finish that indicates high polyphenol content. These are the practical details that determine whether you are getting the metabolic benefits that the research documents or paying a premium for something that behaves like a regular cooking oil. The practical recommendation is to use extra virgin olive oil as your primary cooking fat for low to medium heat cooking, to use it generously as a dressing over salads and vegetables, and to choose the highest quality, most recently pressed extra virgin olive oil you can find and afford. Polyphenol content degrades with age, heat, and light exposure, so store your olive oil in a dark glass bottle away from heat sources to preserve its active compounds. The eighth and final food on this list is one that ties together several of the themes we have been building throughout this entire discussion. Greek yogurt brings together protein, beneficial bacteria, and gut health support in a single food that is practical, widely available, affordable, and genuinely delicious. A large meta-analysis found that higher yogurt consumption was associated with a 21% reduction in abdominal obesity. 21% is a striking number. And a large observational study conducted in United Kingdom twins, which is a particularly powerful study design because it allows researchers to control for genetic factors, found that yogurt consumption was associated with reduced visceral fat mass specifically. These studies are observational in design, which means we cannot definitively claim that yogurt causes visceral fat reduction in the way a randomized trial would allow us to claim. But the consistency of the association across multiple studies and populations is genuinely compelling. and the biological mechanisms through which Greek yogurt could produce these effects are well established independently. Greek yogurt is strained, which means much of the whey liquid is removed, concentrating the protein content significantly compared to regular yogurt. This higher protein content has several important effects. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient, meaning it produces the strongest and most sustained feeling of fullness per calorie of any food category. When protein intake is adequate, hunger becomes physiologically manageable rather than a constant battle of willpower. Protein also requires more energy to digest and metabolize than carbohydrates or fats, a phenomenon called the thermic effect of food, which means that a higher protein diet burns slightly more calories through the digestive process itself. And protein is the essential building block for muscle tissue, which means that adequate protein intake combined with strength training builds and preserves the metabolically active muscle mass that burns more calories at rest and improves overall insulin sensitivity. Beyond the protein content, Greek yogurt contains live bacterial cultures that contribute to gut health. And as we discussed at length when talking about chia seeds, gut health is not a peripheral concern when it comes to visceral fat. It is central. The chronic, low-grade inflammation driven by poor gut health and increased intestinal permeability is one of the primary mechanisms through which visceral fat sustains itself. Greek yogurt, by supporting a healthier and more diverse gut microbiome, helps to reduce this inflammation from the inside out, creating a less hospitable internal environment for visceral fat to thrive in. The practical application is simple. Greek yogurt as a breakfast base, as a mid-morning or afternoon snack, as a topping for fruit, or as the foundation of a higher protein meal provides a consistent and enjoyable way to deliver protein, beneficial bacteria, and satiety in a single serving. Choose plain, unsweetened Greek yogurt and add your own toppings to avoid the significant added sugar content in flavored varieties. And if you want to build the ultimate visceral fat-fighting breakfast, combine Greek yogurt with walnuts and blueberries. 3 of the 8 foods from today's discussion in a single bowl, each one targeting a different but complementary mechanism, working together to create a biochemical environment that your visceral fat simply cannot survive in long term. One nuance worth addressing is the difference between Greek yogurt and regular yogurt, and why that difference matters for visceral fat specifically. Regular yogurt, while containing live cultures and some protein, has a much higher sugar content relative to protein. The straining process that creates Greek yogurt removes a significant portion of the lactose and whey, concentrating both the protein and the probiotic cultures. A typical serving of Greek yogurt contains roughly twice the protein of an equivalent serving of regular yogurt. This protein concentration is what makes Greek yogurt specifically, rather than just any yogurt, particularly powerful for the hormonal and satiety effects we have discussed. There is also a practical consideration around fermentation time. Greek yogurt that has been fermented for longer periods tends to have higher concentrations of beneficial bacteria and may have lower lactose content, making it more suitable for people with mild lactose sensitivity. If you have previously avoided yogurt due to digestive discomfort, it is worth trying a high-quality, long-fermented Greek yogurt before concluding that yogurt is not right for you. The digestive tolerance varies considerably between individuals and between different yogurt products, and for many people with mild lactose sensitivity, the fermentation process has already converted enough of the lactose that it becomes entirely manageable. Before I close, there is something critically important that I need to say clearly and without ambiguity. Everything discussed in this article is intended purely for educational and informational purposes. It is based on published scientific research and represents the current state of nutritional science as it relates to visceral fat and metabolic health. But it is not a substitute for personalized medical advice, clinical diagnosis, or treatment from a qualified healthcare professional. Every person's body is different. Every person has a unique medical history, existing health conditions, medications, and individual metabolic circumstances that may affect how they respond to dietary changes. If you have any pre-existing health condition, if you are pregnant or breastfeeding, or if you take any regular medications, please consult your doctor or a registered dietitian before making significant changes to your diet. It is also important to understand the full context in which these foods work. The research we have discussed consistently shows that these foods target the biochemical mechanisms behind visceral fat, specifically inflammation, insulin resistance, gut health, oxidative stress, and liver metabolism. But they are most effective when they are part of an overall lifestyle that includes a moderate calorie deficit for those who need to lose weight, a diet broadly rich in whole foods and low in ultra-processed foods, adequate protein intake, regular physical activity, particularly strength training, which builds metabolically active muscle tissue, adequate sleep, which has profound effects on the hormones that regulate fat storage and fat burning, and effective management of chronic stress, which elevates cortisol, a hormone that directly promotes visceral fat accumulation. These 8 foods are not magic bullets. They will not overcome a diet of chronic overfeeding, physical inactivity, and severe sleep deprivation. But they are extraordinarily powerful tools when they are incorporated intelligently into a broadly healthy lifestyle. They provide the targeted biochemical leverage that can transform a frustrating plateau into genuine, measurable progress. Let me be specific about the broader lifestyle context because it matters. Sleep is one of the most underappreciated variables in visceral fat accumulation. When you sleep fewer than 7 hours per night consistently, your body produces elevated levels of cortisol and ghrelin, and reduced levels of leptin. Cortisol, the stress hormone, directly promotes visceral fat storage. It signals your body to hold onto and expand the fat depot around your organs as a biological response to perceived threat or stress. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone that drives appetite. When it is elevated from poor sleep, you feel hungrier throughout the day, particularly for high-calorie, high-carbohydrate foods that spike blood sugar and drive insulin responses. And leptin, the satiety hormone that we discussed in relation to walnuts, is suppressed by poor sleep, meaning the signal that tells you you have had enough food is weaker and less reliable. The net result of chronic sleep deprivation is a hormonal environment that almost perfectly mirrors the hormonal environment that drives visceral fat accumulation. No dietary strategy, however intelligently designed, can fully compensate for chronic poor sleep. Chronic psychological stress operates through a similar mechanism. When your stress response is chronically activated, whether by workplace pressure, relationship difficulties, financial anxiety, or any of the countless sources of modern stress, your body maintains elevated cortisol levels around the clock. And cortisol, as we just discussed, is a direct driver of visceral fat storage. This is one of the reasons that people under chronic stress often find it almost impossible to lose belly fat even when their diet and exercise are reasonable. The hormonal environment created by chronic stress is working directly against their fat loss efforts at a biochemical level that no amount of dietary discipline can overcome entirely. Managing stress is therefore not a soft, optional lifestyle recommendation. It is a concrete, biochemically important component of any serious visceral fat reduction strategy. Whether through meditation, regular physical activity, time in nature, meaningful social connection, creative pursuits, or professional support. Finding ways to reduce the chronic cortisol elevation of modern life is as important as any food choice we have discussed today. Physical activity deserves specific mention too, and particularly the role of strength training. Cardio exercise burns calories and has genuine cardiovascular benefits. But strength training builds muscle, and muscle is metabolically active tissue that burns calories even at rest. Every kilogram of muscle you add to your body slightly increases your baseline metabolic rate, which means you are burning more calories 24 hours a day simply by existing. More importantly, muscle tissue is a major site of glucose disposal. When your muscles are developed and insulin sensitive, they absorb blood glucose efficiently after meals, reducing the insulin spike and reducing the signal to store visceral fat. Building muscle through consistent strength training is therefore one of the most powerful long-term strategies for visceral fat reduction, complementing the biochemical effects of the 8 foods we have discussed in a synergistic way. Visceral fat, for all of its biological sophistication and all of its stubborn resistance to conventional dieting approaches, is not invincible. It is not permanent. It is not a life sentence. It is a biological state driven by specific conditions, and those conditions can be changed. When you consistently reduce the chronic inflammation that visceral fat feeds on, when you restore insulin sensitivity so that your cells stop receiving constant fat storage signals, when you repair your gut lining so that inflammatory compounds stop leaking into your bloodstream, when you support your liver so that it stops overproducing glucose that triggers visceral fat storage, when you activate the cellular energy sensing pathways that shift your metabolism toward fat burning. When you do all of these things together, consistently, over weeks and months, the visceral fat that has been stubbornly sitting around your organs has no choice but to respond. And for those of you who may have spent years in dietary patterns that have contributed to visceral fat accumulation, I want to say something important, and I want you to hear it clearly. The damage is not permanent. The human body has a remarkable and genuinely inspiring capacity for regeneration and recovery. Chronic inflammation can be reduced, insulin sensitivity can be restored, gut microbiome health can be rebuilt, liver fat can be reversed, the mitochondria can be revitalized. When you begin consistently providing your body with the biochemical signals it needs to shift from a fat-storing state to a fat-burning state, it responds. It may not respond overnight. It may not respond in a week, but with weeks and months of consistent, intelligent choices, your body has every biological capability it needs to let go of that visceral fat and rebuild a healthier metabolic foundation. This regenerative capacity of the human body is something that gets almost no attention in mainstream discussions about health and weight loss, and that is a tragedy. Because when people believe the damage is already done, when they believe their metabolism is broken beyond repair, when they believe that years of poor eating have permanently compromised their ability to get healthy, they give up. They stop trying. They resign themselves to a body and a level of health that they do not have to accept. The truth is that your body is extraordinarily resilient. Every cell in your body is constantly being replaced. Your gut lining regenerates entirely within days. Your liver, one of the most important organs in the visceral fat story, has a remarkable capacity to reverse fat accumulation when the conditions that drove that accumulation are changed. The inflammatory markers that visceral fat produces can normalize within weeks when you begin consistently removing the foods that drive inflammation and replacing them with the foods that reduce it. None of this is permanent. None of this is irreversible. The direction can always be changed. What matters is that you start, not perfectly, not radically, not with an extreme overhaul of everything you eat overnight, but with one small, intelligent, consistent change. Add the walnuts, buy the broccoli sprouts, switch your cooking oil, make the Greek yogurt your morning base. Each small change builds momentum. Each week of consistent choices builds a new biochemical baseline in your body. And over months and years, those accumulated small changes compound into a transformation that is real, sustainable, and profound. Think about what that means practically. Every morning when you add a handful of walnuts to your oatmeal, you are sending an anti-inflammatory, insulin-sensitizing signal to your visceral fat. Every time you eat 2 small squares of high-quality dark chocolate as an afternoon treat, you are delivering flavanols that improve insulin sensitivity and reduce oxidative stress. Every time you choose salmon for dinner, you are flooding your fat tissue and your liver with EPA and DHA that directly target the inflammation and liver fat accumulation, driving visceral fat storage. Every handful of broccoli sprouts in your salad is activating NRF2, dialing down inflammation, and telling your liver to stop overproducing glucose. Every cup of blueberries is sending anthocyanin signals that promote fat breakdown and support the gut bacteria that reduce systemic inflammation. Every spoonful of chia seeds in your overnight oats is feeding gut bacteria that produce butyrate, strengthening your gut lining, blunting blood sugar spikes, and extending satiety through your morning. Every drizzle of extra virgin olive oil is activating AMPK and improving mitochondrial efficiency, shifting your cellular metabolism toward fat burning. Every serving of Greek yogurt is delivering protein that builds satiety and muscle, and live cultures that support the gut microbiome health that reduces visceral fat-sustaining inflammation. These are not dramatic interventions. They are not extreme. They do not require suffering or deprivation or the kind of white-knuckled willpower that makes dietary change feel like torture. They are intelligent, targeted, evidence-based additions that work with your body's own biochemistry rather than against it. And the cumulative effect of consistently making these choices, day after day, week after week, month after month, is a progressive, measurable, sustainable reduction in visceral fat and an equally progressive improvement in the metabolic health that visceral fat reduction represents. We have now reached the end of this journey through the science of visceral fat and the 8 specific foods that can help you fight it at the biochemical level. Let me quickly recap what we covered today so that the key points stay with you clearly. Walnuts deliver polyunsaturated fatty acids and alpha-linolenic acid that fight the inflammation and insulin resistance that are visceral fat's 2 primary survival mechanisms. Dark chocolate at 85% cacao or higher delivers flavanols that improve insulin sensitivity and reduce oxidative stress in documented clinical trials. Fatty fish provide EPA and DHA that reduce fat tissue inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and directly improve liver fat metabolism, the metabolic gatekeeper for visceral fat. Broccoli sprouts deliver sulforaphane that activates NRF2, reduces inflammation, improves insulin signaling, and directly tells the liver to reduce glucose overproduction. Blueberries provide anthocyanins that suppress inflammatory pathways, promote beneficial gut bacteria, increase fat breakdown, and promote thermogenesis, with a documented 9% reduction in visceral fat tissue associated with higher intake. Chia seeds deliver soluble fiber that feeds gut bacteria, promotes butyrate production, strengthens the gut lining, blunts blood sugar spikes, and reduces waist circumference documented across 8 randomized controlled trials. Extra virgin olive oil delivers polyphenols that activate AMPK and SIRT1, producing 80% greater fat loss compared to vegetable oil in a controlled clinical trial. And Greek yogurt delivers high-quality protein that builds satiety, supports muscle mass, and provides live cultures that support gut health and reduce the chronic inflammation that visceral fat depends on. The common thread running through all 8 of these foods is that they target the real drivers of visceral fat, not just calorie balance, but the specific biochemical environment of inflammation, insulin resistance, gut dysfunction, oxidative stress, and impaired liver metabolism that allows visceral fat to survive and expand despite conventional dieting efforts. Your health is not determined by any single meal or any single choice. It is determined by the accumulated weight of thousands of choices made over months and years. Every meal is an opportunity. Every grocery run is a decision point. Every time you reach for one food over another, you are casting a small but real vote for the direction your metabolism is going to travel. Make those votes intelligent. Make them informed. Make them based on an understanding of the remarkable, intricate, and ultimately very manageable biochemistry that determines whether visceral fat survives or disappears. The 8 foods we discussed today are not a complete list of everything that can help reduce visceral fat. They are 8 of the most powerful, most evidence-supported, and most accessible options available. There are other foods worth exploring, other lifestyle factors worth addressing, and the science continues to evolve and deepen our understanding of how nutrition and metabolism intersect. But what you have today is enough to start. It is more than enough to make meaningful progress. And meaningful progress, consistently maintained, eventually becomes transformative progress. You have everything you need now. The knowledge is yours. The foods are available to you. The science is clear. What remains is simply the choice to begin and the consistency to continue. Your body is waiting for different signals. Send them. Now I want 5 things from you. Give this video a powerful, right now, if this information opened your eyes to something you did not know before. Every interaction you make helps this knowledge reach more people who desperately need it and are still fighting visceral fat with the wrong tools. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the science-based health information that can genuinely change how you live and how long you live. Share this with 3 people you care about. Think of the people in your life who have been struggling with belly fat, who have been cutting calories and running treadmills and wondering why nothing works. Send them this right now. You might be giving them the missing piece they have been looking for. Comment below with specific detail. Not just a one-word response, but tell me which of these 8 foods you are already eating, which ones you had never considered before, and which specific change you are going to make starting tomorrow. The more specific your comment, the more it tells me that you truly absorb this information and are committed to applying it. Specific commitments made publicly have a much higher follow-through rate than private intentions. Write it down in the comments. Tell me what you are going to do. And finally, take action immediately. Knowledge without action is entertainment, not transformation. Tomorrow morning, add one of these foods to your breakfast. This week, make one change. Next week, make another. Gradual, consistent, sustainable progress is what produces results that last and that compound into something genuinely remarkable over time. Your health is in your hands. You now have the knowledge, you have the science, you have the practical tools. What you do with them starting today is entirely up to you. Take care of your body, take care of your metabolism, and remember that every small, intelligent choice you make accumulates into something far larger than any single meal could ever represent. The version of you that exists 1 year from now is being built right now, one meal at a time, one food choice at a time, one consistent habit at a time. Make that version someone who looks back with gratitude at the moment they decided to stop fighting their body and start working with it. See you in the next one.